Welcome everybody. We might as well kick off. The majority of the people are here now, so I'd like to welcome you all to the Sydney Passengers online meeting for October. A particular welcome to those passengers who are attending their first Zoom meeting, which there was one or two today, I think. And to those passengers from other parts of the world who are joining us at unfriendly hours, thank you very much for connecting. It's much appreciated you can join us. As well as local members, we have attendees from New Zealand, the USA, and the Czech Republic. So welcome to all those officially. Our presenter for this meeting is Margaret Walsh. Margaret lives in Melbourne and is an author with a love of the writing of Arthur Conan Doyle and Agatha Christie. Correct me if I'm wrong, please, Margaret, but she has written 5 pastiche novels and numerous short stories about Sherlock Holmes, mostly released through the MX publishing outfit from the UK. And today, Margaret will be talking about what interests her as a writer in the world of Sherlock Holmes. I then we'll open up the meeting for questions to Margaret, so I hope you've all thought of something good and interesting to ask her. We are recording this meeting, and after suitable editing, it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel for anybody to view. We're letting all our members know when it's available to view up there, so if anybody would not like to be recorded, please let me know, and we will endeavour to edit you out. In some media news going around at the moment, the Enola Holmes 3 movie still remains in limbo. Unless there's an official confirmation from Netflix that they'll be making a 3rd instalment, all other media gossip is just fluff and speculation. Similarly with the Sherlock Holmes 3 movie project from Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law, nothing concrete there yet, but plenty of media speculation. What does appear to be a bit more definite is a TV series called Sherlock's Daughter, or possibly Sherlock and Daughter, from the UK. Its premise is that after witnessing the death of her mother's mysterious murder, a young American woman travels to London to look up her missing father, Sherlock Holmes. But he is not what she expected, whatever that means. The part of Holmes is reportedly to be played by an English comedian and actor named Eddie Izzard, who is quite well known for being a gender fluid trans woman in most of his life. So that should be an interesting take on Sherlock Holmes if he plays that part.
It's an interesting piece of casting.
As usual with all our meetings, we'll like to look at what anniversaries are around this date in the canonical stories. So on the 8th of October 1855, the ship Gloria Scott left Falmouth in the UK, carrying some people who would eventually make it to Sydney aboard the Hotspur with the rest of the original Sydney passengers, as recorded by Dr. Watson in the Adventure of the Gloria Scott. On the 9th of October 1890, Jabez Wilson turned up for work to continue copying out the Encyclopaedia Britannica and found a note on the door saying, "The Red-Headed League is dissolved." It took him off to Holmes to investigate that mystery. In October, and depending what year, chronology you like, could be 1888, 1889, 1897, 1899 or 1900. The case recorded by Dr. Watson as the Hound of the Baskervilles took place. That was around this time in October, and also in October, with the dates and years unspecified, the adventure of the resident patient and the problem of the Thor Bridge stories occurred. In show and tell, all I can to show you is a copy of Margaret's book here. This is the Adventure of the Bloody Duck and Other Tales of Sherlock Holmes. So I read that in preparation for this meeting today. So it's a very good ideas there, Margaret. Good speculation and good.
Thank you, Bill.
Stories. Has anybody else got any show and tell? Unfortunately, our main show and tell person, Lee Blackmore, hasn't joined us today. He's usually got something good to show us, but he hasn't been able to make it on this meeting. But has anybody else got any new books or videotapes they'd like to talk about?
I've got one. I've got one, Bill.
Okay,
So
thank
I've
you.
got a birthday present, which is a first edition, or first British edition, I should say, of The Return of Sherlock Holmes. So we can see the.
Nice.
Oh, nice.
So that was very nice. That was thank you to my husband for that, adding to my collection of first editions.
Yes, very nice. Thanks, Erin. And Margaret, you had something as well?
I have a new book coming out on the 2nd of November.
Okay. The Adventure of the Hellfire Hares, yes. Is that your sixth, is that your fifth one or your sixth one?
It's my 6th book, my 5th novel.
Okay, yeah, okay. I'll count that one. I saw it advertised, so I counted it in your list of 5 novels.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's turn over to our main presenter today, Margaret Walsh, and she'll tell us about what she likes about Sherlock Holmes from an author's point of view. Thank you, Margaret. Take it away.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope I'm not boring. As a writer, the thing that I like the most about the Sherlock Holmes world is the sheer effort that Conan Doyle put into creating characters that have pretty much become immortal. When I talk about Sherlock Holmes, I view him in the same light as you do King Arthur or Robin Hood, characters that have gone from being just things and stories to being, I'd say, legends, folk stories even. They've become characters that have an existence beyond their original creation. And in such, we're lucky now that we can write stories using Sherlock Holmes, that we can take our own interests as writers in parts of Victorian society and go places with it that would never have occurred to Arthur Conan Doyle. I was talking about this on Friday with a friend of mine, and the way we came to the conclusion that it's because we're outside looking in. When Conan Doyle was writing, it was contemporary, but we're looking back. We're looking back, and we're seeing more than he could see, because we can see back 100 or so years, or more than 100 years, 150 years, 125 years, however far back you want to set it. We can see back, and we know what's happened at that time. So that gives us an advantage that we can use. If we want to take a portion, or just a portion of something in Victorian society and write a story around that, we can do that because we can look back. We've got all the commentators who've written about aspects of Victorian society, and with it, we can use all that information to create our own stories. For me, I mean, my first interest in Sherlock Holmes also kicked up an interest in forensics, because when I was about 9, and the local librarian suggested Sherlock Holmes books to me, and she said, "I think you'll enjoy this," and she gave me a copy of The Study in Scarlet. And the thing that caught my attention first was when Stamford is telling Watson about finding Holmes beating a corpse, which you stop and think that's a weird thing to do. But then when Stamford says to paraphrase, to see how far bruising would occur after death. And when even as an adult, it probably doesn't occur to you, but as a child, the idea that maybe bruising couldn't occur when someone was dead is it's not something you would come across in everyday life. And for me, it sent me down a rabbit hole, not just of the Sherlock Holmes and crime, because I went from Conan Doyle to Agatha Christie, but it sent me down a rabbit hole of forensics. I ended up mostly focusing in, as I got older, on forensic psychology, how the human mind works, and particularly how it works with respect to law. And I don't like to use the word deviant because it's a motive, or even abnormal because that's a motive. It's just these days it's a fact that everyone's brain is wired differently, and some people are wired much differently to everybody else. But it was the motives behind that, the way the mind works, which is why I think a lot of my books, the novels at least, base around murderers, because of any crime, murder is the one that usually has the most intricate and confusing motives behind them. But having said that, I mean, very few of the canon Holmes stories involve murder, because it's the puzzle that intrigues Holmes, not the fact that it's just a crime. If it's a crime, that's what Lestrade and Jones and Gregson are for. That's what they deal with. But for Holmes, it's the intricacy of it. It's the puzzle. As a writer, that's also the hardest part, doing the deductions, because you've got to try and think like Sherlock Holmes, and there's very few of us can actually think like Sherlock Holmes. But it's a fascinating world. It's a deeply fascinating world. And I had this all written down, and now it's gone and memorised, and now it's gone clean out of my head. That's really not helpful. You're going to have to do a lot of editing, Bill, because I'm waffling.
That's okay.
We'll backtrack to the thing. As a writer, it's the Victorian era is best suited to Sherlock Holmes. He's a product of the era, which for me has meant I have immersed myself quite heavily over the last 5 or 6 years in books about the Victorian period. And that's got probably more wealth of information than any other period in history, because it was the first of the periods where things started to be fully recorded. Yes, we have patchy records going back and things like the royal rolls, but we only have small amounts of it. We've got mass media really kicked off in the Victorian era. The first crime to be probably fully covered by the media was probably the Whitechapel Killer, aka Jack the Ripper. That was saturation media coverage, something that we take for granted now, but was very much a new thing then. So we can track back. I've actually got a book on Jack the Ripper it's supposed to have all the details and papers and everything. It's that thick. You go to earlier killers, you wouldn't have that much material, but there's how much newspaper coverage there was, that a person can get a book 3 inches, 4 inches thick. So just the wealth of information that we have that makes it more interesting. And the period too is interesting in that it was very forward-looking. There was a time when there was that thrust in discovery, in manufacturing, in literature. Everything was thrusting forward, yet at the same time, it was also incredibly backward in the treatment of children, because at this time you still had children having to work at a very young age, not necessarily in the top echelons, but in the lower, the more poverty-stricken parts. Children they were supposed to be going to school, but they weren't always. So you still had the driving need of the whole family having to work so they could keep a roof over their heads. Yet at the same time, they were basically, you had railroads and steamships, and the world was thrusting forward, money was being made, yet at the very bottom it was still as dark and as dire as it had been in the medieval period. And then you also had to look too, you had a woman on the throne, basically the greatest ruler in the world at that time, with an empire that covered half the earth, was a woman, yet women still couldn't vote. She was something unique. No one seemed to be able to see that the queen, their leader, well, their constitutional leader was a woman, but they couldn't seem to make the switch from the fact that the queen is a woman to my wife is a woman and my daughter is a woman. So isn't she as good as the queen? But they couldn't make that switch. The idea of equality was interesting, but it was very much still a philosophical thing rather than a legal thing. So it makes it a really interesting period to write in, because you can have people with all sorts of different views and people not turn around and say, well, that's not right, they didn't do that at that period in time. Well, yes, they did, because the Victorian period, if you had to describe it as anything, was a period that was in flux. Past and the future was still you were never quite sure which way it was going to go. It could have been an enormous success, but they also could have burned out and bombed out very quickly. it is really only after World War II that the British Empire finally split apart. But even so, it's still, in a slight de facto way, still there with the Commonwealth. Except now, instead of being under the complete banner of the United Kingdom, they're partners with the United Kingdom. But that could not have been foreseen at the time that Victoria was Empress of India. It's just such a optimistic time. Optimistic, I think, is a good word for it. And as a writer, I just find that so much more interesting than, I mean, now if you're writing anything now, if you sit it in the modern period, which I have tried to do, and I can't really get a handle on it. It's either dystopian, which to me, dystopian fiction now looks alarmingly like current affairs. And the remote past is too constraining because we don't really have enough information about it to make it believable without having a really, really narrow focus on what you do. But with the Victorian period, there's enough information across all sectors of society, right from the very working poor, right to the politicians and the royal family at the top. We have enough information about their lives to create books and characters in books that are believable because we have that information. I can go, for example, I consider this one my absolute Bible when I'm creating characters. It's called How to Be a Victorian by Ruth Goodman. Now, the joy of this, sorry, Doyle? How?
Higher. Yeah, thank you. Yes. How to be a Victorian.
Yeah. What she does is cover every person from every spectrum of society, from what they wore to the possible jobs, what they did at different times of day, even what they called their meals. So that if you're starting out with a character, this at least gives me a rough background to what is believable and what isn't. But that's not even a full-on, heavy research tome. That's just a general, design, not designed for research. It's just designed for the person that's interested in the Victorian period. But it's a wealth of research material for me. And I know about 3 other Sherlock Holmes writers that also have a copy for the same reason. It gives you a good background. It gives you a start. And you can look at it and go, well, what would someone wear at this, what would a woman wear at this time of day? And it will tell you, basically, after lunch, she would change into an afternoon gown if she was at a particular strata of society upwards, basically. But no, if she was only, sort of a housewife and he was only a clerk, well, she wouldn't change, basically. But if it was the clerk's if it was her husband's employer's wife, she would change her gown after luncheon. And just the little things that now we'd think, why would you change your clothes after lunch? But you had specific clothing, specific times of day. And that is it's a massively interesting thing to look at, that society also has changed that much. But for me, as I said, it's the optimism. It was such a go forward time. And as a writer, I just find that exciting. And then when I can take a character I think I have loved since the very first time I came across him. I mean, the first words Holmes speaks in the book, Watson, you have been in Afghanistan, I perceive. And my first thought was, how do you know that? And then when he explains, I got sort of so excited about the whole idea that someone could be that observant, they could take all these little things and paint a picture of a person that, to me, was different to anything I'd read before, still is. Basically, none of the other detectives created by anybody that I have read, there quite possibly are others, I will admit I haven't read everybody, none of them seem to have that level of observation. And that makes Holmes different and fresh, and as a writer makes him a challenge to write. I've had a number of people say, well, why don't you write your own characters? I like writing my own characters, and I do create my own characters within my books, and some of them have been in more than one book. But Holmes is just such a joy to write because he is so different. He is observant. He is compassionate. He doesn't suffer fools. I won't even say he doesn't suffer fools gladly. He doesn't suffer them at all. But he's so human and so interesting. I've read Poe's character Dupin. Amazing. I'm going, what? It's mechanical. There was just a freshness to Holmes, and I think that is what has captured so many people's imaginations, and why now there are so many people writing good Sherlock Holmes, and there are a lot of good Sherlock Holmes books out there. And it's a delight to go into a bookshop and find a new one. It's like finding a treasure sometimes, particularly here. I don't know about what it's like up in Sydney, Bill, but down here, I can't get my books actually into brick and mortar bookstores, because I have been told, there is no market for Sherlock Holmes.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, and my response is, well, then how come my publisher makes all they actually produce a Sherlock Holmes? If Amazon can sell it, if Fishpond can sell it, why can't you sell it?
Yes.
But it's probably still a growing fandom. It's the oldest fandom, because there've been fans of Sherlock Holmes from the time the very first stories were put together, and it's been continuous. But I think now it has moved more online, I think, than any other. I think because it's been such a worldwide thing that it's been more natural for people to come together online, like we're doing now. And that also was a little bit before, but I think also it was a big move from COVID. It sort of pushed more things online. But as a writer, it's also opened things up for me and I've talked about this with a couple of other writers. None of us would have thought about doing something like this. We've written our books and gone along and tried to get them published, but none of us would have thought to have done a talk like this about what Sherlock Holmes means to us. And I mean, it means different things to me as a writer than it does as a reader. As a reader, it is a sheer delight just to be exposed to the intelligence, because that's the one thing all Sherlock Holmes writers have in common. None of the characterizations of Sherlock Holmes, you can ever describe the character as being stupid. It doesn't work. He has to be smart, and he has to have a razor sharp intellect, or it's just not Sherlock Holmes. And so consequently, the books, if the character in the books doesn't have that razor sharp intellect, the person you're reading it's not going to get published, because it's not Sherlock Holmes. And as a writer, I find him a challenge. He is a challenge to write, a delight to write. But the whole Victorian era is just so. If you talk about if you ask someone what the Victorian era means to them, almost inevitably at some point, if you say, when I say Victorian or Victorian period, what 19th century, what does it mean to you? Inevitably, somewhere along the line, someone's going to say Sherlock Holmes, because it's as much an icon of the 19th century as Queen Victoria. People may not necessarily even think much of the character. You may not even know the name of the character. You go, the bloke with the deer stalker. Basically, thank you, Sidney Paget. But he's just so iconic of the 19th century, and to get a chance to play with an icon, play is probably not even the right word, to utilise such an icon and to create stories that other people will enjoy, that's pretty special, and that makes both the Victorian period very special to me and Sherlock Holmes very special to me.
Definitely. Thank you,
And
Mark.
that was an awful lot of waffle. It really was.
That's interesting, because like you say, the Victorian era was such an incredibly fast-changing time with huge technological changes and huge society changes. And something was going on all the time, so it's an amazing period for sure.
And medical changes as well.
Changes, yep. What's your writing regime like? Do you set aside a particular time of the day to write, or do you just do it when the mood takes you?
I write first thing in the morning. I set about an hour and a half aside Monday to Friday. Because I still work full time, my weekends are usually spent doing the things around the house that I don't get a chance to do because I'm working. So that's sort of the housework and the shopping and all that. So I set aside about an hour. It's usually from about 6:30 to 7:30 or 8 o'clock, and that's when I write. On a good day, I can get out 1,500 to 2,000 words.
Oh.
On a good morning. Some days I sit there and I stare at the computer screen and it does not want to cooperate. And those mornings it might only be a couple of hundred, but the way I look at it is at least I'm writing.
Fantastic, yes. Do you attend any like writing workshops or writers groups?
No, I haven't. My writing apprenticeship, if you like, started the way it has done for a few writers, and that is fan fiction. But mine's going right back. It wasn't even Sherlock Holmes fan fiction. Basically, mine's going right back to the late 1970s, early 1980s with a British television show called Blake 7, which was science fiction. I started...
Erin knows that one. Yeah.
Yay!
That's my favourite show.
I love that. I loved that. And that's when I started writing. So I was about 14, 15. And I went that, and then the thing just kept writing for my own interest. I then disappeared for a while into NCIS, which I think helped me plot more. Because when you're dealing with something that's crime-based, you have to be able it gave me started me plotting. Because before with the Blake 7 stuff was very self-indulgent. But like any teenager, what they write is self-indulgent. But when I started writing NCIS, I had to have a plot. Because it couldn't just be personality-driven, there had to be a crime behind it. And when I ended up into writing Sherlock Holmes, I had watched BBC Sherlock and wrote a couple of little fan fiction pieces of that. Not as much, because while I thought it was a good idea in that I liked what they did to modernise it, some of it worked well, like making Irene Adler a dominatrix rather than a adventuress, both just that little bit shady for the time period, but not being outright illegal, was a nice piece. And making Jim Moriarty a IT guy rather than a professor of mathematics was also a nice little update. Making Mary Morstan an international assassin did not work. But it was writing that few little pieces of Sherlock fan fiction that I popped. I actually had them on my Goodreads page at a time when Goodreads allowed you to put your own writing up there. I had a couple of them on there. And David Ruffle approached me on Goodreads and asked me to write a piece for an upcoming anthology he was doing for new writers called Tales from the Stranger's Room, Volume 3. And that was the first piece that I wrote that actually was set in the 19th century. And it's Bill. I think Bill will have read the story, seeing he's read The Adventures of the Bloody Duck, because I put it in there.
Yes. Remember that one?
And that was when I wrote that. And David put it in the anthology, and I found myself thinking, well, maybe I could write a proper, a full-on Sherlock Holmes pastiche. So I started fiddling around with it, and I'd sort of had a few ideas and sort of potted around with it, and then I had just finished reading that How to Be a Victorian when I came across another book about a couple of young trans women in Britain in about the 1850s, the infamous Fanny and Stella, who were arrested and treated abominably by Scotland Yard. And in there, it talked about how they dressed as there were two young men who dressed as young women. In the case of one of them, you don't know whether she was doing it for jollies, or generally felt she was a woman. One of them definitely was, because she had insisted on a girl's name right from the time she was about 4 years old. So, and I have family members who are actually the same. So I have a cousin who was the same, and I knew right from they were very young that the body they had wasn't what they were, but be that as may. But reading about the treatment of these people, I really got quite cross about it. And I'd been flipping between that and How to Be Victorian. And in How to Be Victorian, there was actually a piece on tight lacing, which was on the lacing of the corset so tightly as to crush the rib cage. And I found myself thinking about how Fanny and Stella must have had to have laced. And I got a whole, first I was reading it, and I just got a whole scene in my mind where Watson was explaining tight lacing to Holmes, because the sort of women that Holmes would have dressed as wouldn't have tight laced. They'd have laced, but they wouldn't have tight laced to the point where it actually deformed the torso. And I had this whole mental scene at a mortuary with Watson explaining what had happened, and I sort of sat down and jotted it all down. And then from that came the Mollyboy murders. Just from that one scene that I jotted down, and I just started working around that. And I wrote the book. I thought, what am I going to do with this? Because I honestly had no idea what to do with it. And I was fortunate enough to have lunch with a couple of ladies who have also had work published with MX, Narelle Harris and Wendy Fries, aka Atlin Merrick. And they both said to me, send it to Steve at MX Publishing, which I did, and not actually expecting. I was expecting to hear thanks, no thanks. And I got an awful shock when he said, yes, we'll publish it.
Right.
And from then on, basically, that was the first book, and I'm now writing my seventh.
So when you finished that first book, was that a huge relief, probably to finish it, and then?
It was. It I think took me about 4 years to write, but mostly because I had no idea what I was going to do with it. If I'd known I had somewhere to submit it to, it probably wouldn't have taken me that long. I'd have been more focused. So I said I'd do it a bit and I'd put it away. I'd do a bit more and I'd put it away. And basically, it was a relief, but it was also a shock. When I got the email from Steve saying that they were going to publish it, I just sort of sat there and stared at my computer and I was like, what?
Fantastic. Man. So did you see that when you finished that book, did you see that as the first in the line of other books? Because you were bursting with ideas for future stories, or did you take a while?
Actually, yes, I actually have a notebook that I jot down ideas. I read a lot of books about various aspects of Victorian society, just out of course the thing interests me, but sometimes I'll come across something and go, oh, I think I can get something out of that. And so I put the book to one side, and I also make a note. I did a count up, and I think I've got something like 13, still got 13 spots put away for future books. The one I'm working on now is looking at the rise of spiritualism, and more importantly, the fraudulent mediums that were rife at the time. So that the one that I'm currently working on involves Victorian spiritualism and the myriad ways people cheat each other.
All right, we might throw the meeting open to the floor now. Anybody else got some questions for Margaret? Yes, Keith.
Yes, excellent presentation. Thanks very much. If you're interested in spiritualism, are you following the Helen Duncan case? The last in England to be charged under the Witchcraft Act?
Yes. I always thought that was extremely interesting. I've actually been delving into the Witchcraft Act of 1737 in the last couple of weeks. I always thought the Helen Duncan one was very unfair. I have a number of friends who are actually mediums, and it was pretty obvious that the information that Helen Duncan was getting was pretty much on the nail, no matter how she was getting it.
Well,
To treat her as she did,
about the sinking of the HMS Byram. That's what got her into trouble. She knew about that. Yeah.
It was certainly not the right thing to do to charge her.
Yep.
And she was certainly not fraudulent. That much is obvious. I mean, there always will be people who look and go, oh, I can make money with this. In fact, I've been reading one book I have been reading has actually been a little thing about Houdini and the way he went about proving they were fraudulent. And there's a whole lot of illustrations in there on how fraudulent mediums operated, which is one of the things I'm using for my reference. But there are also ones like Helen Duncan. There's no way you could ever call them fraudulent.
Yep. Good. Oh, excellent. And have you signed the petition for her to receive a pardon?
I didn't know there was a petition.
There's a petition
I shall go
circulating.
looking for that.
Yeah.
No, I shall go looking for
Darn it.
that.
Good. Good.
Thank you
Thanks
for the
very much. A
kitchen,
great
Greg.
presentation. And when will that book on spiritualism be made available? When do you expect that to be out?
This one, it's at the moment it's called Sherlock Holmes and the Deathly Clairvoyant. It's the one
Right.
I'm working on at the moment. So we're probably looking at around about this time next year, because it
Okay,
takes
good.
me about 12 months.
Good. Thank you.
You're welcome, Keith.
Margaret, one of your novels, the Molly Boy Murders, has been published in Italian.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Well, Luigi Paci, who is the publisher at Mondadori, he goes to Steve with ones that he thinks might be good, and he approached Steve for have you got any ones you want to put up? And Steve put Molly Boys up, and apparently it sold out. They do a paperback run. They do it on Kindle and Italian. They also do a paperback run, and apparently the paperback ran sell out. God, the paperback run sold out, and since then another 2 or 3 have gone to Italian. Perplexed Politician's gone to Italian, and London Dock Death has gone to Italian. So
Have you actually been published yet? I haven't seen those listed anywhere. I just
yes, they have.
yes,
London Dock Death.
right. I think they're in a series. Is it called something like Crimes of the Night? Is that the series name?
Crimes of the Night is the title I gave to Molly Boyd Murders. London Dock Death is The Crimes of the Port of London, and as Perplexed Politician.
Oh yes.
And that's The Crimes of the County.
Okay. Interesting. Oh, great. That's fantastic. You've made it in the 2 languages. This is good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite mind-blowing. When you forget them for the first time, you get your author copy and you look at it and it's your name on the cover. It's all Italian. You can't read it, but
Yes, but it must be a huge thrill to see it though. Yes.
oh, it is. It is.
Paul, you had something to ask Margaret?
Yes, thanks, Margaret. Very interesting talk. Couple of questions. Did you consider Australian publishers at all when you first started? And why did you end up with the UK outlet?
I ended up with the UK outlet mostly because MX is a specialist Sherlock Holmes publisher.
Yeah.
And I figured I would probably, when Narelle and Wendy suggested contacting Steve at MX, I figured I would probably have more luck there. And if he didn't want it, he might be able to point me in the direction of someone who might. And to my delight, he wanted the book.
He wanted it, yes. So another brief question. Do you base any of these on real life cases? I mean, you draw your information from what's happened or happening?
Yes and no. The only one that's really had any real actually occurred is the short story The Adventure of the Bloody Duck, and that didn't quite occur in the way that I have it in the story, but I came across it in a book on a true crime book from the talking about crimes in the 19th century, and it was a domestic murder in New York State, where it was only discovered because someone's duck came home covered in blood. And that's when they discovered that person had been butchered and it had been washed down the bath, and the pipe had burst and the duck that had been bathing in the warm water got covered in blood. And I used that as the premise in the short story that I wrote, The Adventure of the Bloody Duck, but the rest of the details were completely different. I don't like wanting to use real crime, because I think that's a little unfair, because even people have descendants, and I sort of don't want anyone to come across and think, oh, that's based on my great-grandmother or whatever. I mean, I could probably do one quite literally based on my own family, because my great uncle murdered his father, basically because his father tried to kill their mother. he wasn't having any of that, so he killed their father. So
Hmm.
I know that that's my family, and I sort of, would I be uncomfortable if somebody took it and used it? Yes, I quite possibly would, even though I didn't know the people. So I sort of try and come up with things a little bit different that hopefully no one can point at and go, I know that crime. Well, I hope you haven't, because it came out of my imagination.
Yes. No, great. And apologies for not having read any. I will now of yours. But is anything set in Australia, or any connections with Australia?
There's one, London Dock Deaths. No, I think I did New Zealand for London Dock Deaths. My apologies. That's my other side of my background.
Right. Okay.
I intend to. I do have one that's. I have one that I have in my mind involving the goldfields in Victoria, basically, but I don't know when that one's going to come to the boil. It's a matter, once I've written, I tend to like to take a complete break and go for a different sort of crime to what I've done. Like if I've done something where the murders have been knives, I'll go. I won't go near a knife for several books or whatever. But I have got one idea for one with on the Goldfields Victoria, but when that one comes out is anyone's guess.
Yeah. Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you, Paul.
Bye.
Anybody else got some questions for Margaret? I can throw another one in. Margaret, I've been a bit of a critic of the MX product over the years, due to the number of spelling mistakes and typos that I find reading the books. That must be pretty frustrating for you as an author to find that in your work when the book comes out.
It is, when you consider that I know by the time it's been published, it has been edited at least 6 times, and you still find typos. With my books, once I finish the initial manuscript, I leave it a couple of days, then I go back through and I carefully read it for everything. It goes to Steve. It then goes to Steve. Usually reads it and then and picks up anything. It then goes to the editor Rick, who goes through it. It comes back to me. I go through it again. Usually, if Rick's picked up anything, he'll highlight it. So I have to read through, make sure, pick it up. Then inevitably we do another round before it goes to the publisher, and then of course I get the book. I open it, and there's a typo.
Yes, it must be drive you nuts, I'm sure. Yeah.
Oh, it does. And the thing is, I know at least I've gone over it at least 3 times, and it's gone through Rick at least twice, and Steve once, sometimes twice. It's been edited 6 or 7 times, and we still find typos.
I don't think you can blame the author for that, because the author's so close to the material, it's easy for them to make mistakes like that. But I would think a third party reading it, like an editor or a proofreader, would pick up.
Yeah, we do it, but you still pick it. And sometimes too, it doesn't help the program too that's used to transform it from a Word document into the program that they use to print can sometimes do strange things.
Okay.
We actually pretty much had one lot we had to when it went to PDF, it just picked up the first half of the book and switched around. We still don't know how it did that. We had to put it basically try and get it all back the way it was. But most of the time it doesn't do too badly. Sometimes there's some doozies. Autocorrect is not your friend.
No.
Basically, never ever have autocorrect on your when you're writing, because it will do some very strange things. I made a reference in one of my books to the Prince Regent, meaning basically what King George IV had been before he was crowned, and autocorrect insisted it was the Price Regent. I mean, yes, all right, he liked his money, but that was a bit much. So that's my one advice: never use autocorrect when you're writing.
The wonders of modern technology. That's right. Now we've got at least one other author here today. Paul Jenkins has written a book here, which I think he's sort of talking to publishers about. Well, but for any other frustrated authors, what would be your hints for somebody starting out writing a pastiche about Sherlock Holmes? What would you advise them to do as their first approach, or how to do it properly and get the best result?
Basically, for publishing, or
No,
starting writing?
for
The
writing.
publishing?
Yeah, just for writing.
For writing, first, make sure you know what you're writing about. Know your era. It's very easy to get something wrong. And if you've got people who are going, have to think that people reading your work are going to know the period. So to me, it's best thing, research. Do your research before you write. Basically, look at exhaustive. If you're setting it on the London docks, for example, read what you can about the London docks, how they operated, what companies were running them, what cargo came into what dock. Because sure as eggs are eggs, if you are loose with that and you do manage to get it published, someone will write to you and say, tobacco didn't come into that dock. Basically, know what you're doing. Make sure your research is impeccable, but also have fun. Don't be afraid to stretch it a little bit with the characters, because Sherlock Holmes basically is something different to everybody. Basically, there are some things that are always going to be Sherlock Holmes: the razor-sharp intellect, the compassion, the inability to suffer fools. But he's also someone that you can use to stretch your own wings writing, and keep him believable, but don't put him in a straitjacket. Don't make him a caricature. That is something where some Sherlock Holmes writers fall down. He stops being Sherlock Holmes and he starts being a Sherlock Holmes caricature. That nothing that they put in his mouth sounds real. It sounds like it's come from a stiltedly bad film, or if they've got the dialogue purely from Conan Doyle. No, don't do that. Basically, just relax it that little bit. Basically, make him real.
Yeah, good advice. Thank you. And Keith, you have something as well, something new?
Just the comment that I publish with Random House, which is a nightmare, because it takes so, and I write on non-fiction, and it just takes so long for it to go through the bureaucracy of the publisher. So hopefully whoever you're dealing with operates more smoothly, because it seems to be quite a small, neat publishing house, which is agile.
Yes.
Yeah, you're lucky. What are the implications, do you think, of ChatGPT? Are we going to be replaced by machines in terms of writing?
No, I don't think we will. I have seen some Sherlock Holmes short stories allegedly written by ChatGPT, and no one will touch them. They're dead. There's nothing there. It's just word vomit. Basically, probably taken from Conan Doyle direct, but it's still word vomit. It makes no sense. I honestly can't see it being replaced, because one thing it doesn't have is imagination. And without imagination, you don't have a writer, or at least a writer of fiction. You just don't have that. And it's an AI, basically it's a chatbot. It's a computer program. It does not have an imagination. You've gone mute, Keith.
I was just saying that that's encouraging. Not going to be replaced.
I honestly can't see it.
Okay, Margaret, you said that MX Publishing was suggested to you by two other writers. Have you been happy with them, and have they helped you in any particular ways?
They have. Basically, both of them were prepared to listen to me at a time when I was nervously squawking on about my first book, at a point when family was sort of going, "Oh, will you shut up?" They were prepared to listen. And when I said that I did not know what to do with it, they were sort of unanimous. Not only did they say, approach Steve at MX, they actually physically wrote out his email address for me.
Good on them. Yeah.
But, send us to him. Tell him we told you to contact him.
Yeah, Steve was a member of our group as well from London, and also Anthony Richards from Bree Books in the UK as well, another publisher of small publisher of Sherlock Holmes books there, but he's a great guy as well. He's also a member of our group, so we're happy to have two publishers as part of our membership, which is fantastic. Anybody else got any extra queries from Margaret? She's given us a wonderful talk today. I think you answered.
Well, very well done.
Sorry, Robert.
Very well done. Enjoyed
Thank
it.
you.
Comments very much.
All right. Has anybody else got anything to tell us? Any news from their local areas? Or Alice, how's things going with you in the Czech Republic? You're still meeting your friends in Prague every now and again?
No, now we have monthly online meetings only.
Got online as well now, yes. That's great. All right. Well, if nobody else got any more questions for Margaret, and Margaret's starting to exhausted all her knowledge she's passed on to us, or I'll say a big thank you to Margaret for a wonderful presentation and letting us know what's going on in her world.
Thank you for having me, Bill.
Keep an eye out for your new book coming out, Hellfire Hares. And we might do a little blurb about you in the next issue of our journal. So we'll promote some of your books as well, just to let people know that we weren't here today, what your product's like and what you're writing about. So it'll be good. So
Thank you, Bill. Much appreciated.
Speaking of the journal, I'm about to start work on the next log. So if anybody's got any articles or news or reviews, please send them my way. Usual email address, passengerslog@yahoo.com.au.
Thank you, Erin. Okay, folks, that's it for today. Thank you for joining us. It's been a marvellous presentation.
Thank you very much, Margaret.
Thank you for
Thank
your
you,
time.
Paul.
And,
Thank you.
good luck with your writing.
Thank you.
Okay, bye everybody.
Bye.
Goodbye.